Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 298, A Whole Lot of Trouble. The episode begins with Ash and the gang still making their way to Granite Cave so that they can meet Stephen Stone, who was studying rare stones there. It took them a little while to make it to the cave, as they had to go through a thick forest first, but they eventually made it to the entrance, leading Max to confirm that this was the entrance to Granite Cave. Ash was very excited to go inside the cave, since he wanted to meet Stephen so that Stephen could perhaps give him some advice on how to train, since Stephen was such a good trainer, and also he thought that Stephen may know locations for Ash to train, since he was on Dewford Island quite a bit, it seemed like. Since it seemed as though Stephen had been away from his father for a while. May also wanted to go in the cave, eager to potentially find these rare stones that Stephen was looking for. Max was particularly excited as well, because he figured that a lot of Pokemon probably lived in Granite Cave. However, May reminded Max that even if there were a whole bunch of Pokemon in the cave, they would probably be very hard to see since the cave would be super dark, so he shouldn't hold out hope to see a whole bunch of Pokemon. May soon got a bit scared though, as she realized that if there were Pokemon in the cave that she couldn't see, then that could be very fucking frightening since the Pokemon could sneak up and try and attack her. So May asked Max if it was possible if he could check the Pokénav for any scary Pokemon living inside the cave, but Max of course told her that the Pokénav didn't have that function, otherwise he would have used it by now. Ash was getting impatient listening to all this talking, as he just wanted to go meet Stephen, so he interrupted Max and May's conversation and advised that they get moving. So, without further ado, Ash and the gang went inside Granite Cave, with Ash eagerly leading the way. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, they were already in the cave and were digging a whole bunch of holes in hopes that Ash and the gang would show up and Pikachu would fall into one of these holes. Jesse was happily digging, declaring that Ash and the gang would never suspect a hole inside of the cave. James, on the other hand, was not happy to dig, as he stopped and claimed that it was too hot inside the cave to dig, and he was too fucking exhausted, also stating to Jesse that he didn't really see the point in digging all these holes because hole traps never worked for them, and suggested that they instead just try and attack Ash and the gang with their Cacnea and Viper. Jesse simply fired back that James had no right to question Jesse's hole digging plan, stating that she was in charge, and ordered James to keep digging, stating that she was sure Ash and the gang and Pikachu would show up very soon. Meowth countered that Jesse wasn't the one in charge, they were all equally in charge, but this just made Jesse mad, as she yelled at him and tried to continue digging, ignoring Meowth, although Jessie just ended up getting more angry and annoyed as Wobbuffet forcibly popped out his Pokeball, forcing Jessie to recall it. But once again, she still just continued digging. Meanwhile, Ash and the gang were making their way through Granite Cave, with Ash calling out to Stephen every so often, trying to get his attention, although to no avail. Ash was beginning to get confused, because Stephen wasn't answering, fucking no one was answering, so he was like, is no one even in this damn cave? And he only got more confused, as he and the gang suddenly stumbled upon a fork in the cave, and didn't know which way to go. Brock didn't know what direction to go in either, but he came up with an idea, as he placed several glow-in-the-dark red arrow markers on the left path, the path that they were going to go down. Essentially, Brock placed these red arrow stickers on the path they were going down so that they could find their way back down the path if it didn't lead them to the right area, and then they could go down the other path instead. With these stickers set, Ash and the gang went down the path, with Ash still calling out to Stephen. Stephen did happen to be at the end of this path, but he didn't hear Ash and the gang's calling because he was so far down the path. As for what Stephen was doing, well, he and his Aeron, a hoenn Pokemon, were of course digging for the stones that he was searching for. Unfortunately, all Stephen could find was basic-ass stones, so he got a bit frustrated and decided to take a break. Stephen's Aeron then takes a break as well, as Stephen asks if it was able to find anything, but of course, Aeron shook his head, meaning that it hadn't found anything. Stephen congratulated his Aeron on at least trying to search, and gave it some food, some Pokemon food as a reward, which it happily ate, directly from his hand. Stephen advised that Aeron better enjoy this food, because it was going to need energy, because they were now going to go find a new spot in the cave to search, hoping that they would have better luck elsewhere with finding these rare stones. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, they were currently hiding behind some rocks, looking at the hole that they had dug, awaiting Ash and the gang to arrive, with Jesse very pleased with the finished hole, and the fact that Ash and the gang were about to arrive. However, James reminded Jesse that she had said that fucking ages ago, and Ash and the gang still hadn't arrived yet. Just then, though, Jesse, James, and Meowth all heard Ash walking down the path, calling out for Stephen, making Jesse excited, as she realized that Ash and the gang were finally there. James admitted that Jesse was finally right, though stated that he still thought that they should just reveal themselves and battle Ash and the gang with Cacnea and Viper. But Jesse simply ordered James to shut the fuck up and duck down so that Ash and the gang didn't see them, and James obliged, although Meowth still didn't duck, as he was wondering who the fuck Stephen was, and he wanted to see if he could spot him. However, Jesse ordered Meowth to duck down as well, stating that it didn't matter who Stephen was, and Meowth obliged. Ducking down, just as May excitedly ran over to the hole, believing that she saw a bright light surrounding an entrance to another part of the tunnel, motioning for Ash and the gang to follow, though of course, before May could get to this entrance that she spotted, she, along with the rest of the gang, tumbled into Team Rocket's hole that they dug. Upon seeing this, Team Rocket cheerfully reveals themselves, as they all do a happy dance, proud of themselves for actually capturing Ash and the gang. Even James, the most skeptical about the pitfall traps, was happy. Ash and the gang look up and see Team Rocket, and they were about to yell at them for trapping them in yet another hole, when suddenly they were stopped when they heard the ground of the cave rumble. This rumble was followed by a crack in the ground, which spread throughout the hole and outside of it, which caused the ground to collapse, and everyone, including Team Rocket, fell further down the hole and into the depths of the cave. Stephen and Aaron, who had arrived at a new spot in the cave to dig for the stones again, overheard this huge commotion and ran off in the direction of the sound to investigate. As for Ash and the gang and Team Rocket, as they fell down the hole, they all ended up getting separated, falling down different paths, as essentially the ground giving way and causing everyone to fall revealed 3 separate paths that were underneath the ground, and basically 3 groups ended up forming as different people fell down different tunnels. The first person that we see was Max, as we see that he had ended up down in one of the tunnels, trapped in some dirt, although he quickly emerges from the dirt and calls out for everyone to see if anyone was by him, and this leads Pikachu and Meowth to pop out of the same dirt pile that Max was in. So the first group was Max, Pikachu, and Meowth. Seeing how Max, Meowth, and Pikachu had been separated from the others, this causes Max to realize that the Granite Cave must have been a huge complex of tunnels, and he, Meowth, and Pikachu must have fallen into a deep one due to the hole Team Rocket dug, which caused the floor to cave in. Basically realizing what we already knew. And therefore, Max tells Pikachu that the two of them had to work together to find the others. Meowth just remarks that digging sure could land you in trouble, leading Max to remind Meowth that Team Rocket was the one who fucking dig the hole in the first place, which was the reason why they were all split up. So Meowth shouldn't really be talking here, because it was essentially his fault that they were in trouble. Meowth ignores what Max said, declaring that he wanted to help Max and Pikachu find the others as well, specifically Jessie and James. Max declined Meowth's offer to help them find everyone, because he obviously didn't trust Meowth, thinking that maybe he would just try and find Team Rocket and then double-cross Ash and the gang or some shit. But Meowth, being the expert negotiator that he was able to be like, yo, Max, you're gonna have an easier time finding everyone if there's 3 of us looking as opposed to only 2 of you guys. So, with that, Max, Meowth, and Pikachu decided to make a truce, with Max suggesting that they simply just walk up through the tunnels to higher levels, after coming to the conclusion that he, Pikachu, and Meowth had arrived at the bottom level of the cave, so everyone else had to be farther up. And Max and Pikachu begin to walk off, although Meowth suddenly refused to follow, stating that he should be the one to lead, not Max or Pikachu. Max questioned why Meowth wanted to lead so bad, leading Meowth to foolishly admit that he, Jessie, and James had spent a lot of fucking time digging that hole to try and capture Pikachu, and he wanted to make sure that Pikachu wouldn't escape, and he feared that Pikachu would escape if he and Max were in front of him, because, that would mean that they would have the leeway, they would have the lead, so they could easily run away from Meowth if Meowth tried to capture Pikachu. Upon hearing this, Max and Pikachu obviously came to the conclusion that Meowth was planning to betray them and capture Pikachu while they walked together, so they began to just walk off, reminding Meowth that they didn't need him to find the others. He was the one who wanted to come in the first place, so they just walked off without him, so that Meowth couldn't double-cross them, like Max had initially feared. Meowth soon realized that he really wanted to reunite with Jessie and James, and he wasn't confident that he could find them on his own, so he decided to give up on his plan to capture Pikachu, and yelled for Max and Pikachu to come back as he ran after them, deciding to follow them, and hopefully be led to Jessie and James. Meanwhile, May had fallen down a second tunnel and popped out of some dirt, just as Max had, and complained about how dirty she was, liking to be cleanly, when suddenly Jessie, who was still falling, fell down on top of her, down the same tunnel, causing May to get hurt a little bit and yell at Jessie, to which Jessie yelled back, causing a huge argument. However, Jessie soon stopped arguing, declaring that she had something way more important to do, which was get the fuck out of this tunnel, explaining that since the cave they fell into was much lower than the main level that they were in before, all she had to do was just climb back up. So she did just that as she stood up on her feet and grabbed onto the cave wall to try and climb up, but this was not fucking working, as she didn't know how the fuck to climb, and they were way too far down. Meanwhile, Ash and James had fallen down the third tunnel, along with Brock, and the 3 of them were all stuck in a pile of dirt as well, with only their heads having emerged. Ash and James instantly began arguing, as Ash blamed Team Rocket for the whole situation, since they were the one who had dug the original hole, leading James to argue back that digging the hole was solely Meowth and Jessie's idea, not his, and claimed that he wanted to battle Ash and the gang for Pikachu, not rely on a hole, since he believed that battling was a better way to do things, and more fair. Ash doubted that James really cared about fairness, so therefore challenged him to a battle right then and there, to which James obviously accepted, but Brock interrupted Ash and James' argument before they could battle, stating that they could battle later, but they had more important things to do right now, such as get out of the massive pile of dirt they were currently in, since they were stuck, and then find an exit to get out of the tunnel they were currently in, reminding them that they had to get out of the dirt before they could battle anyways. Ash and James saw that Brock was right, and the 3 of them then proceeded to wriggle and squirm in the dirt to try and break free, but they couldn't. So they took a short break, took a quick breather, relaxed, all that, and they tried again, but much to their dismay, they still couldn't escape the dirt. Meanwhile, Max, Pikachu, and Meowth were still going down the tunnel to get higher up to the other tunnels, searching for Ash and the gang and the rest of Team Rocket. However, Max wasn't just looking for Ash and the gang, he was also looking for Steven, and upon hearing Steven mentioned again, Meowth inquired as to who Steven was, leading Max to reveal that Steven was a strong trainer, supposedly from the Devon Corporation, and he supposedly trained and did a whole bunch of research here in Granite Cave, and mentioned that he and the rest of the gang were supposed to meet with Steven, and also explained that he wasn't just someone who worked for the Devon Corporation, but also the son of Mr. Stone, the president. Max also added that the reason why he really wanted to find Steven, even more so than he did when he first entered the cave, and even more so than Ash probably wanted to find him, was because since Stephen had to be somewhere in the cave searching for rare stones. He likely had been in a lot of places around the cave by this point, so he likely knew the cave's layout. So if he knew the cave's layout, then he could probably help Max, Meowth, and Pikachu find Ash and the gang. Meowth, upon hearing about Steven, told Max that he shouldn't put a whole bunch of faith in someone like Steven, since if he was a president's son, then he clearly was likely used of not doing anything and just having shit handed to him, because the president was so rich and all that. But Max assured Meowth that he was sure Steven did a whole bunch of shit, since he was known for being a strong trainer and a researcher. Suddenly, Pikachu smelled something and began walking off in another direction, with Meowth following, confusing Max as he didn't smell what Pikachu smelled. And he questions where Pikachu and Meowth were going, leading Meowth to reveal that he and Pikachu smelled something, but the smell was too subtle for a person's nose. Only a Pokemon's nose could pick it up. So with that, Max followed Meowth and Pikachu, hoping that they would lead him to Ash and the gang or Steven. Although he had to yell for Meowth and Pikachu to go slower, since they were speeding towards the source of the smell, and Max was having trouble keeping up. Meanwhile, as for Steven, he and his Aaron were walking through a crevice in the cave, going back up the path they came, hoping to find the source of the crashing sound that he heard. So it was likely that Meowth and Pikachu didn't smell Steven, that was for sure. Anyways, back with Ash, Brock, and James. They had finally managed to get out of the dirt and were walking through the tunnels, trying to find everyone else. They were of course having no luck though, so James began to get frustrated, stating how useless looking was, and they were just going to be lost for the rest of their lives. James was so unhappy with his current situation that he began to go on a rant about how much his life sucked even before this current situation, complaining about how Jessie and Meowth would always mistreat him all the time. And he proceeds to quietly yell out for Jessie and Meowth, since he realized that he didn't even really care if he found them. If he found them, he would be fine, but he didn't need to find them, because they treated him like shit all the time. However, James soon realized that Jessie and Meowth could help him potentially find a way out of Granite Cave, so he decided that calling for them would actually be the best case scenario, so that they could at least go out the same way. So he yelled as loud as he could for them, charging ahead of Ash and Brock, desperate to find a way out of the Granite Cave. However, James was stopped in his tracks, startled, when what appeared to him as a small ball fell from the ceiling, although when the ball was exposed to more light in the cave, it was revealed that it was actually a Pokemon, which Ash scanned on his Pokedex to reveal was a Hoenn Pokemon named Aron, which uncurled from its mere ball state and started growling angrily. James was angry as well at the Aron for blocking his path, and was so angry that he mustered up the courage to begin touching the Aron in an attempt to move it, as he began banging on Aron's head and try to push it away with his hand. This only angers the Aron even more though, so it unleashes a cry, which causes several more Aron to fall from the ceiling, also originally in ball formations before they fully reveal themselves. Ash and Brock obviously got scared upon seeing all these Aron, and even James was now frightened just because of the sheer amount of them, as they all began to run down the path they were on, screaming, as the Aron group jumped towards them and chased after them. While this was going on, Steven had made it to the original hole that was dug by Team Rocket, where everyone fell down into the different paths, and also sees some nets on the ground that Team Rocket must have dropped before they fell. These nets likely were going to be used to capture Pikachu, but anyways, upon seeing these nets, Steven stated his assumption to his Aron that someone must have fallen down this hole, since someone left nets behind, and he tells his Aron that the two of them had to help whoever fell, so they both leaped down into the tunnels beneath the hole, really hoping to find the people that fell, fearing that they could be injured. Damn, Steven's epic, bro. He's just willing to save people and risk his life by jumping into a hole that he doesn't know where it was going to lead. Damn. Anyways, back with James, Brock, and Ash, they were still being chased by all the Aron, running for their goddamn lives, when James suddenly spotted two tunnels up ahead with another tunnel above them. James immediately goes toward them and climbs to the high one so that Aron couldn't reach him from up there. However, Ash and Brock, also desperate to escape the Aron, pushed James down to the ground so that the two of them could climb up first. James was angry and he wanted to yell at Ash and Brock, but he turned around to see the Aron fast approaching, so he merely just climbed up and joined Ash and Brock in the high tunnel while he screamed with fear. Thankfully though, Ash, Brock, and James were able to get up into this high tunnel without the Aron noticing, so the Aron simply continued down one of the lower tunnels, assuming that's where Ash, Brock, and James went. Meanwhile, as for Max, Pikachu, and Meowth, they have arrived at a waterfall that had vines streaming down in the middle of the cave, and Meowth was able to determine that the fresh air was coming from just above the waterfall, so this made Max, Pikachu, and Meowth want to climb up, since fresh air likely meant an exit, or at least getting higher up into the cave and closer to the exit. Max was wondering how the vines could have grown by the waterfall, but he didn't care that much, as he simply decided that they should use the vines to climb up the waterfall. Meanwhile, back with Jessie and May. Jessie was still trying her best to get out of the hole they were in, but she couldn't. As for May, she was just sitting, watching all this unfold, getting annoyed with Jessie's failure, as she told Jessie to hurry up and just escape the hole already. This just led Jessie to scream at May in anger, demanding that instead of just sitting there and ordering Jessie to hurry up, May actually assist her in getting up. May claims that all Jessie had to do was ask, and she begins to help Jessie out of the hole by pushing her up, though Jessie still complains about how May was hurting her or how she wasn't pushing hard enough. Eventually, Jessie can see the next tunnel above them, but she was stuck inside of the hole that May was pushing her through. And Jessie was obviously infuriated by this, as she ordered May to push her out of this hole. May tried her best to push Jessie out, but she was truly stuck. Just then, Jessie looks above her to see yet another tunnel above the one that she was trying to reach, but then the floor that was separating the one that she was trying to reach and this one further up then broke as a Loudred, a new Hoenn Pokemon, broke through the flooring and almost stomped on Jessie's head as it danced around, causing Jessie to scream in fear, as well as in pain when the Loudred ran off down the path of the floor it was on, but stomped on Jessie's head in the process. Jessie being stomped causes her to fall down back into the tunnel where May still was, as May asked what happened, having not seen the Loudred and only having heard Jessie's screams. However, she didn't get to find out what happened, as Jessie was too dazed from being stomped. May looked up, though, and saw that the hole had now gotten wider, so she and Jessie could escape. Now, the hole, of course, had gotten wider because Jessie falling through it due to being stomped had basically damaged the hole and made it bigger, if that makes sense. Suddenly, Jessie fully regained consciousness as she heard a voice coming from up above them, as did May. Unbeknownst to them, this voice belonged to Steven, as him and his Aeron had just arrived at the place where the horde of Aeron had chased away James, Ash, and Brock, and Steven soon spotted the cave up high or the tunnel rather up high that James, Ash, and Brock had went through, and correctly assumed that anyone who fell down may have went through that tunnel, so he knew that he had to get up there as well, but wondered how he was going to be able to climb up, since he didn't believe himself to be a good climber. Steven was determined, though, so he successfully climbed up regardless. Of course, bringing his Aeron with him as well. Meanwhile, back with Meowth, Max, and Pikachu, they were climbing the vines to get to the top of the waterfall, but Max was getting very exhausted from the climbing and was annoyed to see that they were barely halfway up. Meowth was annoyed at this as well, to the point where he decided to take a break, since he didn't want to whine and complain like Max was, stating how Max's complaining reminded him of Jessie and James, and that was a bad thing. As he proceeded to go on about how Jessie and James weren't just annoying because they always complained, but because they always relied on him to do shit, rather than doing shit on their own. Max becomes annoyed even more with Meowth's yapping, stating that he was a Pokemon and he wasn't supposed to talk, so why was he talking so much? And Meowth then answered Max's question by talking about his past, as we then see a flashback of the events that Meowth had told the audience about in episode 63, I think it was, the Meowth backstory episode, where he met Meowsy and then wanted to talk like a human to impress her, and we all know how that went. Right, Meowsy ended up leaving Meowth and not caring about him talking whatsoever, and Meowth even admitted this to Pikachu and Max. But yeah, the important thing was Max and Pikachu were very bored by Meowth's backstory and simply ignored Meowth as they continued climbing. And once a pebble from Pikachu's climbing hit Meowth, he realized that he was being ignored and left behind, and Meowth angrily shouts at them that he felt like he was being disrespected, but Max just responds, looking down at Meowth, that the story was way too long and boring, and orders Meowth to continue along, or otherwise he would be left behind. Even though Meowth was immensely angry, he still knew that he would need Pikachu and Max's help to probably find Jessie and James, so he followed along, telling them to wait up, as he climbed as fast as he could. Meanwhile, back with Ash, Brock, and James, they had managed to climb up several higher tunnels and made it to an overall higher floor, but they were still depressed, as they could never thought that they would truly reach the top of the cave where the original hole was. They suddenly felt a huge jolt of excitement, however, when Ash and Brock recognized Brock's red arrow sticker that he left on the fork down the path that they didn't go down, so Brock knew that they were very close to the entrance of the cave now. He informed James and Ash of this, and they became excited as well, as they rushed towards the entrance of the cave, only for their excitement to cease, because they weren't watching where they were going, so they ended up falling down the first hole that Team Rocket had dug, again, because, they were going down the same path of the entrance, so they were bound to come across the hole on their way back. Of course, them falling into this hole doesn't mean that they just fall into the hole the way it started. It means that they fell all the way back down the numerous tunnels, just like the first time. So they were essentially back to square one. Brock, James, and Ash falling down the hole again had also caused the ground to shake more, and therefore the hole got bigger, which Steven saw as he approached the hole, having heard James, Ash, and Brock's screams, though unfortunately, James, Ash, and Brock had fallen before Steven could actually see them. Meanwhile, back with Max, Meowth, and Pikachu, they had managed to finally get to the top of the waterfall, where the smell of the fresh air only intensified, according to Meowth, as Meowth, Max, and Pikachu looked up to see daylight through a canyon opening, which was just above the waterfall, leaving Meowth the question how they could climb up, since now that they were at the top of the waterfall, there was no more vines to use. Suddenly, Pikachu smelled something again, so Max was really hoping it could have been Steven, who may have passed by the area. And it was in fact Steven that Pikachu likely smelled, because Steven had in fact just walked by, somewhat nearby where Max, Meowth, and Pikachu were. Not knowing this for sure though, Max, Meowth, and Pikachu continued toward the source of the smell. Basically, once you reached the top of the waterfall, you could go up to get outside the cave, but you could also walk in another direction towards the left or right, and Max, Meowth, and Pikachu were going in one of those directions to follow the smell. Meanwhile, as for May and Jessie, they had managed to climb out of the tunnel that they were in because of the hole getting bigger, though they were exhausted, and they soon spotted what they believed was a literal light at the end of the tunnel, which signified an exit was on the horizon, so they ran towards it as quickly as possible, only for it to be revealed that they had made it back to the main floor of the cave, but just like Ash, Brock, and James, they fell into the first hole that Team Rocket had dug and plummeted all the way back down to the bottom, as they screamed. where Ash, Brock, and James currently were, and having encountered the Aeron horde again, running from them again, just as Jesse and May fell on top of them, knocking them all down. The 5 of them quickly got up, though, as May and Jesse saw the Aeron horde for the first time, and all 5 of them ran away from the Aeron horde as quick as possible. Meanwhile, as for Meowth, Max, and Pikachu, they heard the screaming of Ash, Brock, James, Jesse, and May, and ran towards it because it was also in the same direction as the smell that Pikachu detected. Sure enough, when they approach a really dark part of the tunnel they were in, they find the source of what Pikachu was smelling, being Steven, who introduces himself, much to Max's excitement, upon meeting Steven, as Steven asks if they were the people he was looking for who had fell down the hole. Max confirms this, though adds that several of his friends, Ash, Brock, and May, had fell down as well, with Meowth adding that his friends Jesse and James had fell down too, and they were all missing. And upon telling Steven that the friends were missing, Max requests if Steven could help find them. Steven agreed to help, stating that his Aeron had managed to alert him somehow that all the other Aeron in this cave were really angry, so Steven came to the conclusion that it was probably Ash and James and Jesse and May, just everyone who had gone missing, that had angered the Aeron and woke them up. He was like, yo, we have to find them before the Aeron kill them or something. So Steven, knowing his way through Granite Cave relatively well, led Meowth, Pikachu, and Max down a tunnel very quickly so that the Aeron couldn't get to Ash, May, Brock, James, and Jesse. Anyways, as Steven, Max, Meowth, and Pikachu went through the tunnel, they eventually came across a huge crack in the cave floor, and Meowth wondered how they were supposed to get past, and why Steven had led them there. This leads Steven to reveal that he could hear footsteps coming from down below the crack, and told Meowth, Pikachu, and Max to listen carefully, and soon enough, they were able to hear the footsteps as well, and heard them getting closer when, soon enough, they spotted Max, May, Brock, Jesse, and James walking underneath them through the crack that they saw. So, Max called out to get May's attention, and this caused the 5 of them to look up and see Steven, Max, Pikachu, and Meowth, as Jesse, James, and May, Brock, and Ash were still running from the Aeron. Steven hurriedly ordered them to meet him, Max, Meowth, and Pikachu over by the waterfall, as he gave them directions to the waterfall. And right after getting these directions, Jesse, James, Ash, May, and Brock had to continue running as the Aeron horde was quickly approaching them, although they were able to hear the directions. Apparently, Steven knew their shortcut back to the waterfall was across this crack in the cave, so he had Meowth, Pikachu, and Max grab onto him as he jumped across this crack in the cave, and since he was apparently such a good jumper, he was able to make it across, and went to the waterfall. As for Ash, May, Jesse, James, and Brock, they had managed to outrun the Aeron a little bit and made it to the waterfall. However, they panicked as they saw the Aeron horde approaching them. They hadn't outrun them for long. Suddenly, though, Steven appeared above them, because he was at the top of the waterfall with Max, Meowth, and Pikachu, while the rest of them were at the bottom, and Steven simply instructed Jesse, James, May, Ash, and Brock to stay where they were. And although they were obviously hesitant, as the Aeron had cornered them at this point and were getting very close, they just braced for impact, obliging to Steven's request, and prepared themselves for the worst. However, Steven was confident that the worst wouldn't happen, as he tried to get the Aeron to calm down, believing he could do so, but it didn't work, as he realized that the Aeron were simply too angry, even for his ability to calm Pokemon, which he was usually pretty good at. But he had a backup plan, as he had his own Aeron use Roar, which was able to get the horde's attention and stop their rampage, allowing Steven to actually use his skills of ordering Pokemon to order them to return to their nests, which they do, as Steven assured Aeron that there was nothing to be scared of, since humans were all friendly. So the Aeron retreated into the depths of Granite Cave toward their nests. As for Ash and May and Brock and Jesse and James, they had closed their eyes in fear of the Aeron killing them, but they opened their eyes when they heard the Aeron leaving and saw that they were in fact leaving, as Steven then jumped down to all of them, causing Ash, James, Jesse, May, and Brock to stare at him in confusion, as Ash was confused as to how Steven was able to control wild Pokemon like that and just get them to leave them alone. Meowth, Pikachu, and Max then jumped down to everyone as well, and everyone was happily reunited with their respective groups, including Jesse, James, and Meowth. As Meowth jumped into Jesse and James' arms and apologized for all the drama that Team Rocket had earlier in the day when they were digging, and James and Jesse apologized as well, admitting that they did need each other after all. Yay! Or not really. Anyways, now that Team Rocket were reunited, and they saw Pikachu reunited with Ash, they felt that now was the perfect time for them to steal Pikachu, just as they were planning to do earlier. So they do their motto and demand that Ash and the gang give Pikachu. Steven was obviously confused by Team Rocket's motto, and questioned what the fuck they were even talking about, leading Ash to tell Steven about Team Rocket, basically explaining that they actually weren't good people, and advised that he should watch out, explaining how they always tried to steal Pokemon, including his Pikachu. Just then, James and Jesse send out their Cacnea and Seviper to battle and help them take Pikachu, although of course, Cacnea hugs James, prickling him first. Although Ash simply tells his Pikachu to use Quick Attack to fight back, and Brock and May were about to send out their Fortress and Torchic respectively to help Pikachu, but before Pikachu could attack, or May or Brock could send out their Pokemon, Steven shouted, stopping the fight, and proceeded to remind Ash and the gang that Granite Cave was the Aeron's home, and they lived in peace there, so he didn't want Ash and the gang to risk fighting Team Rocket and accidentally ruining the cave or some shit. Steven told Ash and the gang not to worry though, promising that he could fight Team Rocket himself without destroying the cave, as he scolded Team Rocket for trying to steal a Pokemon and sent out one of his ace Pokemon, an Aggron, which Ash used his Pokedex on, revealing that it was the final evolved form of an Aeron. Team Rocket were obviously intimidated by the huge Aggron, but they didn't even have much time to register it, as Steven ordered his Aggron to use Hyper Beam, which sent Team Rocket blasting off out of the already existing hole at the top by the waterfall, therefore not damaging the cave and getting rid of Team Rocket in one hit, leaving Ash and the gang amazed at Steven and his Aggron's power, and impressed with how Steven handled the situation, especially with how he was able to calm down the Aeron before. Steven then recalls his Aggron and goes to check on his Aeron as well, which was still out, only to see that it was searching by the ground and came to Steven to alert him that it had found a stone of some kind. So Steven hurriedly goes to where the Aeron had searched and pulled out none other than a Firestone from the ground, leaving Ash and the gang impressed by Aeron's searching skills, as well as the Firestone itself, while Steven was also impressed by the Firestone, admitting that that's what he'd been searching for days, a Firestone, since he knew that it could evolve several Pokemon that he wanted to make stronger. May was clueless, though, as to how the Firestone was valuable, wondering how it could possibly make Pokemon evolve, but Steven clarifies that a Firestone could help evolve certain Pokemon, like Growlithe into Arcanine, or Eevee into Flareon. Steven then thanks Ash and the gang for helping him find the Firestone, admitting that if Ash and the gang didn't end up leading him to this area, then he would have never found the Firestone, even if they had led him to the area technically by accident. Ash then changed the subject of the conversation a little bit, telling Steven that he wanted to find him since he thought that Steven would know a good place for him to train for his rematch against Brawly. And sure enough, Steven did know a good training spot, as he led Ash and the gang to a secluded inlet outside of Granite Cave, the perfect spot for Ash to train for his rematch, which was also coincidentally where Steven had parked his sailboat before going into Granite Cave, and he then got on his sailboat with his Aeron and informed Ash and the gang that it was time for him to take his leave, since he had to go searching for more evolution stones. Before Steven departs, though, Ash and the gang thanks Steven for his help with the Aeron and getting them out of Granite Cave, as Steven gives Ash some encouragement for his rematch against Brawly and wishes them good luck in general. Ash and the gang and Steven then wave goodbye to each other as Steven and Aeron set off in their sailboat into the sunset. The episode then ends with Ash stating that he was now more determined than ever to train super hard so that he could beat Brawly and then one day eventually become as good as Steven and his Aggron and take them on one day. Yeah, that seems like a lofty goal now, but we'll see. First things first, though, Ash had to train for his rematch against Brawly.